Greetings and welcome back to the podcast. This episode we are joined by Mr.Brad Wall, 14th Premier of Saskatchewan, Principal at Flying W Consulting, and Partner at CW Cattle Co. Mr. Brad Wall is also a board member at Helium Evolution, Whitecap Resources, NexGen Energy, Maxim Power Corp, the Canadian American Business Council, and is a special advisor at Osler, Hoskin, and Harcourt, and E3 Lithium. Mr. Brad Wall is a graduate of the University of Saskatchewan with an honors degree in public administration and an advanced certificate in political studies. Among other things, we discuss taxing the Western Canadian provinces, encounters with Alberta Premier Peter Lougheed, and common sense economic policy. Enjoy. This podcast episode is sponsored by Enverus. Enverus is the world's largest energy-dedicated software-as-a-service company committed to helping customers close the gap between data and value creation. Enverus has been supporting the Canadian energy industry for over 30 years. Visit Enverus.com for more details. This episode is brought to you by Ninepoint Partners and the Ninepoint Energy Fund. Ninepoint Partners manages unique alternative investments that offer investors the benefits of better diversification. With over $8 billion in assets, Ninepoint is among the largest independent asset management firms in Canada. Learn more at ninepoint.com. This podcast is brought to you by EVA Software. EVA is a next-generation analytics platform powered by McDaniel Research and tailored specifically for oil and gas to quickly derive insights that matter to energy operators, investors, and advisors. EVA is the only platform that leverages public data, in-house operator data, and exclusive data sets interpreted by professionals at McDaniel Research. This combination allows rapid analysis of the most complete data possible, enabling better decisions around A&D, completion design, and optimal field development. Visit TuringAnalytics.net to learn more about leveraging EVA to uncover hidden trends, make informed decisions, and stay ahead of the competition. This episode is brought to you by Canada Action, whose belief is that the Canadian oil and natural gas industry is a force of good in the world, and that history will look back upon the sector favorably. Canadian energy plays a critical role in our society by reinforcing global energy security, underpinning Canadian economic prosperity, and setting the benchmark for environmental leadership. Get your free stickers at buildcanadaup.ca to show your support, or follow Canada Action on social media. Good morning, Mr. Brad Wall. Thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate your time. I know a lot of listeners out there will appreciate your insights, so thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Trevor. Appreciate it.
Most people know you as the 14th Premier of Saskatchewan, but how would you define yourself nowadays?
Well, comfortably and happily in the private sector, I would say, and out of politics. Now, I guess all over 6 years, which is hard to believe. I guess cliches become cliches because they're true. And time truly does fly. So now, I guess I'm doing a number of things. I'm involved. I have a consulting business that I started shortly after I left politics that's busier than I thought it might be. And so I'm grateful for that. And I'm on a few boards, which I really enjoy. Most of them focused on industries important to Western Canada and all of them Western Canadian. And then I guess I'm a silent partner, but helping out every chance I can on a yearling operation together with our son in southwest Saskatchewan around the Cypress Hills there. It's certainly busy enough, but I'm really fortunate, Trevor. I got to do my dream job, which was to be Premier. I still have a hard time believing I had that opportunity, but I did, obviously, and I was lucky enough to have it and probably thought, even as I was deciding to step away from politics so that the party could renew, so that we, our family could renew, so the government could be renewed, I probably thought, look, nothing is going to be as good as this job. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy to report that I was wrong. In some ways, I'm enjoying what I'm doing now more than I did that dream job. So there you have it. There's the update.
How would you define yourself politically? Maybe a small c conservative, lowercase l liberal, libertarian, small r Republican. How do you look at it that way?
I'm a conservative. That's what I am. I would say an economic conservative and maybe a bit more libertarian when it comes to other issues. I think, they asked Ronald Reagan, Ronald Reagan, of course, before he entered politics, when he was still involved in Hollywood, he was the president of the Screen Actors Guild down there, which was a union, and very much a Roosevelt Democrat. And obviously his views changed on the role of government in the economy, and he became an outspoken conservative and went on for General Electric, did these stump speeches across America. And at one point, after giving one of his patented sort of free enterprise talks, he was asked by the media, how have you moved from left to right to such a great degree and in short order? And Reagan, and I'm paraphrasing here, so it's not an exact quote, but Reagan said basically, look, I don't believe in left and right. I believe in up and down. There are common sense policies. There are big policies that will take a jurisdiction up directionally, and then I believe there are those that will drag a jurisdiction down. And he said, I'm in favor of up. And so I think that's a more relevant question, especially in today's politics, in terms of these spectrum questions that people ask, are you on the right, are you on the left, are you conservative, are you classical liberal or big government liberal, or but I guess to use that, I would probably say conservative. And I think conservative parties do best when they remember that, that little note James Carville stuck into Bill Clinton's note, that it's the economy, stupid. That's all that note said, famously. I think Canadian conservatives at the provincial level and federally do well to remember that the economy is the most important thing. We're seeing it now. Voters, of course, are wanting to vote for a party that understands that economic issues in the household, but also for the country or for the province, need to be the top priority of who the government is. Budgets don't balance themselves. You need to be concerned about fiscal and monetary policy and the Bank of Canada policies. You need to at least be interested in that. And we're all familiar with the quotes from our current prime minister on both of those counts. So I think that's the most important thing. If you're a conservative and your number one priority is not the economy, I'm not sure what commends you to get the support of other people who might be representing other parties for whom the economy is not the number one priority.
What is a regressive tax? And an example like the federal carbon tax, how do they harm low-income earners disproportionately?
Well, it is a tax on everything. Now there are 7 premiers that are calling either for the cancellation of the tax or for the pause because of the sort of the double standard on home heating fuels in Atlantic Canada. But I remember during my time, I was the only premier that was opposed. We were the only province opposed to it. And we made the case that this is a country it's a massive country from a landmass perspective, but with a very small population. We're a northern population. And so things like heating are disproportionately more important compared to nations that are not northern nations or colder weather nations. And the lifeblood of this country's economy, the sectors that pay the bills, are the extractive industries and the trade-exposed industries. Think of energy, think of mining, think of other commodities, think of modern agriculture. Trade-exposed industries are never protected by a rebate scheme, the likes of which the federal government put forward when they came with this tax. And so as a result of that being a tax on everything and trade-exposed industries being hurt disproportionately, residents in regions of the country that have perhaps a larger concentration of those kinds of industries, low middle income families that are involved in those sectors are hurt by it. And then because it's a tax on everything, there is an underlying cost to everything. Like, here's a good example. Saskatchewan right now, I credit the policies of provincial government, of Premier Moe, and a strong economy has seen we have the lowest inflation of the provinces in the country. I don't think it's a coincidence that the premier, in reaction to the fuel oil issue in Atlantic Canada, just said to the feds, we're not collecting tax from Saskatchewan people, at least, on their natural gas bills, because, of course, we have a Crown corporation doing that in Saskatchewan. That was the opportunity. I don't think it's a coincidence that our inflation rate is the lowest in the country among the provinces. And we, for a big part of someone's monthly bill, we as a province, the government has said, we're not collecting your carbon tax. I think that's maybe answers your good question better than anything else.
In simple terms, if you got millions of dollars coming in, the tax affects you a lot less than somebody who perhaps doesn't earn as much as that on an annual basis.
It's true. It's a challenge with consumption. There's other advantages to consumption taxes, but a big challenge with the kind of tax the carbon tax is that it's if all of the basics of life are going up and the basics of life take up more of your salary, more of your monthly budget than they do for someone at a higher income level, it by definition is more harmful. And that is the carbon tax. And I think that's why we see 7 premiers now moving towards opposing it. It's why we see support for quote unquote axing the tax at very strong levels. It's why we see, I think it's a big part of why we see support for the Poilievre-led Conservatives well above 40% in major and credible polls. So, yeah, I think Canadians are saying I think we've had enough.
To what degree do you think that Western provinces and Canadians in general are being taxed without representation on issues like the carbon tax?
Well, it's not a very good federation construct that we have here in Canada. What I'm going to say here might be a bit controversial, Trevor, but you asked the question and I'm not running for anything anymore. This federation basically is unlike the federation to the south of us, the United States of America. Our federation is de facto unicameral. So that means we have one house. The federal partner in the federation has one seat of government, the House of Commons. Someone might say, well, what about the Senate? And I would say, yeah, what about the Senate? The Senate there is no utility in the Senate. And even the Senate's structure even does not represent the units of the federation like the U.S. Senate does. The U.S. Senate, of course, is a deliberative and legislative and veto-wielding body in the U.S. system. And we all know that while Montana might only have one member of the House of Representatives to California's hundreds, well, Montana gets 2 senators, the same as the state of California. Rhode Island gets 2 senators, the same as the 2 senators that New York gets. That's the balance in their federation. That ensures that the units of their federation have sort of a check, have a balance against complete population-driven voting formulas or governance formulas. We don't have that in Canada. Neither is there a prospect for meaningful Senate reform in Canada. So we only have the House of Commons, at least as it relates to federal policies. And the House of Commons is a rep by pop institution, not perfectly. There are some adjustments for population variance, but basically it's a representation by population institution. So we are absolutely underrepresented in Western Canada when it comes to issues like the carbon tax, at least as compared to other federations. A lot of people in the center of the country, they would say, well, how sad, too bad, sort of suck it up. There's more voters. There are more Canadians over here. And so they should have more influence, more say in policy. And that's true. But if your federation has only a unicameral seat for the federal government and it is representation by population constituted, then by definition, you said, look, the units, the provinces, they don't matter as much in this country. And if we could go back in time and especially equipped DeLorean, if there was one around, and visit with the leaders in Alberta and Saskatchewan, our provinces were born into the Federation on the same day in 1905, and have a visit with them and say, here's the way it is. Here's the way this Federation is going to shape up. You might want to ask some tougher questions before you sign on. I think I would take that trip in that specially equipped DeLorean, because it's not a great federation if you're living in Western Canada or any under, let's say, the prairies, Alberta and Saskatchewan, or an underpopulated province.
Is there a remedy for that you see, a realistic solution?
No, not realistic. I mean, theoretically, there's remedy, and that would be a constitutional amendment. But the way the constitutional amending formula is, it would have to go through Queen's Park, the provincial legislature in Ontario, or the National Assembly in Quebec City, and then meet a population represented threshold. And it'll just never happen. I remember as premier, I would talk to other Canadian premiers, central Canadian premiers, and just sort of say, what do you think? There was a brief moment during the Meech Lake debate where a premier of Ontario by the name of David Peterson, basically as a nod to the West, said that, and included this in his support for Meech Lake, said, look, we would actually consider a seat calculation change or representative change in the Senate, or supporting that from an Ontario perspective. But of course, and Mulrooney talks about that, Brian Mulrooney talks about this in his book, very generous moment on the part of the Ontario premier at the time. And that window closed. Meech Lake is dead. And we've not had another Ontario premier who thinks that. We certainly won't have a Quebec premier that thinks that. I can point to personal experience where we've asked the question, hypothetically, what do you think of this? And those premiers are reasonable, and they say, well, what's in it for me? My job is to represent the best interest of Ontario. So there's an advantage for the largest populated provinces to not have sort of an equal a check and a balance in the Senate. Why would they give up the influence that they have through all the seats that they occur? So no, I do not think that's the remedy for the imbalance in our federation, the unequally yoked nature of certain provinces in our federation because we don't have the population. The remedy would be a triple E Senate or even a two E's in Senate. And it's never going to happen. And so that leaves us with some pretty tough. I guess the only other remedy, Dan, and this is not a surefire remedy either, but the other one is if we can elect a federal government that overlooks the fact that there's not a lot of seats out in certain places in the country and governs and advocates for them anyway. And we've seen that. The Mulroney government was a pretty pro-West government, I would say, those years, and same with the Harper government. And I have a hope that if Poilievre is successful, we'll get that. But that's not a permanent remedy. It lasts only as long as the next election comes along and the Liberals or the NDP or a coalition replaces a government that might take a more generous view of Western Canada. So it's not a permanent remedy or a lasting one.
From a historical perspective, taxation without representation hasn't gone too well. Certain case studies, maybe south of the border, have not proven too well. Do you think that there may be justified anger in the West from that perspective?
I think we've gotten used to this over years and years and years. Don't get me wrong, I'm certainly picking up the strong desire for change in Saskatchewan and Alberta at the federal level. Strong desire for change. That's a pretty temporal thing. Anytime you have a time for change movement and you elect a new government, as important as that can be on issues like the carbon tax and just generally in terms of government, as important as that can be, it's not in 50 years that government will have been long ago defeated or replaced and be back to the same old reality of our federation, this de facto unicameral federal seat that's driven by rep by pop. So, but for whatever reason, I don't pick up a lot of, and I live right in southwest Saskatchewan where it's a pretty conservative area and an independent-minded area. And I don't pick up a lot of what I'll call more lasting, I'll say existential concerns about the West within Canada.
This podcast episode is sponsored by Connate Water Solutions. Do you need cost-effective water sourcing options to supply your next drilling or completions program? Connate Water Solutions is a specialized hydrogeology company focused on water well drilling, testing, and water management services in Western Canada and Texas. Contact info@connatewater.com or check out connatewater.com for more details. This episode is brought to you by Galatea Technologies. Galatea is a software company based in Calgary that is focused on helping producers better manage their fluid logistics. Galatea enables field operators and truck drivers with the ability to make the optimal decision on every waste, water, or clean oil load, resulting in 20% savings on trucking and disposal costs. The Galatea platform makes it easy to create digital truck tickets, manifests, and shipping documents that automatically flow through the field data capture and finance systems. Galatea's platform is used by over 50% of Canadian producers, 600 trucking companies, and hundreds of disposal locations. Visit GalateaTech.com to learn more about how to optimize that last line on your lease op. On the subject of capital gains taxes, why is raising capital gains taxes a bad idea for the economy?
Well, others have said it better than I could, and others who are economists and others who are investors, angel investors, entrepreneurs, of course, in agriculture, notwithstanding the exemption, and in the small business sector, notwithstanding those changes as well. I think every question on tax policy the first question should be, what's the impact on the economy? Every tax hike is going to have probably a negative impact on the economy, unless it's replacing a tax. That's even less helpful. But so you should maybe be about picking, if we think we need a tax change and increase because for revenue needs of government, if we've come to that conclusion, the question should be, how do we do least harm to the economy? And I think they picked wrong.
Saskatchewan has developed into a strong economy through the years, through commodities, farming, oil and gas. Do you remember when that started to emerge, and were you aware of that strength that was building within the province?
Well, hopefully we had something to do with it, actually. We campaigned in '07 on a growth plan that was pretty intentional. We set targets for growth, for population growth, for sector growth. Now, don't get me wrong. I said during my time in government, and I say it again, government ought not to take credit for changes, for improvements, for the growth. There's good luck and good timing involved in terms of when we got elected. And there were even more importantly with the people of the province and the companies, the small businesses and the larger corporations who were a big part of that. But I think policies from our government helped, especially on population growth. We had a graduate retention plan that we campaigned on in '07 and implemented and basically said to kids, look, if you will stay in Saskatchewan when you graduate instead of go to Calgary, you can earn up to $20,000 of your tuition back. And when I left, there were 59,000 Saskatchewan people who were enrolled in that plan. We were very intentional about changes to immigration policy, especially not the nominee program, so we could see more investment and people coming to Saskatchewan. And the biggest change, and then I hope we were helpful in terms of helping with a provincial mood change, with an attitude change that the province had. And, we had governments for years in Saskatchewan that would say things like, well, it's statistically impossible for our population to grow at the national average. That was actually said by NDP politicians. We had NDP premiers who would refer to Saskatchewan as the wee province, dating back to Tommy Douglas, and then the gentleman that I replaced, that I followed. We had comments from NDP ministers like, we'll always be in and out of equalization. In other words, why would you aspire to have province status? Because we're always going to be in and out. By the way, we have been a half province since '06, even back with the NDP in power, and haven't looked back. So that was proved to be wrong, as did their comments on population as well. But you see that attitudinal change that was needed in Saskatchewan needed to start at the top. We needed to have government that said, this province can lead. We have 38% of the world's potash, 15% of the world's uranium production in any given year. We're the second largest producer of oil, and we got half the arable acres in the country and in a world that needs food security. And pick a crop where between 30 and 50% of world exports, this province should be aspiring to lead, not be a have-not province, not be saying things like, well, we'll always be in and out of equalization. So I think that attitudinal change, I hope we played a part in it, I guess is my point. And I hope our growth plan policies help play a part in what has, Saskatchewan right now is forecast to lead the country in growth. Great, massive export increase numbers you probably have been hearing about. And so, this Saskatchewan advantage, I remember, I think it was under the Notley government, Alberta kind of just said, we're not going to use they had this great sort of branding that you will know called the Alberta Advantage. I think even Kenny might have tried to bring it back in terms of official government branding or provincial branding. But for whatever reason, Alberta laid that down. And I remember I said it at a Saskatoon Leaders Dinner speech. I said, they don't want that brand, we do. And we've been using Saskatchewan Advantage ever since.
Did you take the perspective that the job of government was to get out of business's way? Did you think of it that way?
I sure did. We have a lot of government in the economy in Saskatchewan that the people want to keep, like crown corporations. But we replaced a government that was famous for trying to pick winners and losers in the economy with taxpayers' money. And my comment to that was the problem when government tries to pick winners and losers is that governments usually only get it half right. And that's when conservative governments are tempted to do it. It's the same as well. And unfortunately, the half right part is the loser. Governments they do not have a track record. Look at studies the Fraser Institute has done, studies that other independent groups have done, and just anecdotally remember the businesses that governments anointed with massive subsidies or direct grants. They do not have a great track record of picking winners. They always seem to pick the losers. The problem is it isn't their money. They're using taxpayers as involuntary venture capitalists. And I don't think that's a role for government. When we were first elected, one of the first things we did, the government owned, in partnership with a private company, a large fertilizer plant. And we, as a government, we said, we don't think the government should be in the fertilizer business. So we would like the markets, it looked pretty good. We indicated our interest in selling. The private company wanted to sell. So we sold, and we took our share of the proceeds of that, and we invested in a children's hospital. We were one of two provinces in Canada that did not have the Children's Hospital. And now there is one in Saskatoon. And there is a role. That's a role for government.
Was there an Alberta premier that you admired or you worked best with? Do you remember one that sticks out to you? Maybe it was a little before you, but Peter Lougheed, did you like Ralph Klein, or was there any that stick out?
Yeah, there was two, I would say, and you've named both of them. I remember being pretty excited. In grade 12, I was the senior stick, what they called the senior stick for the grade 12 class. And so as a result, when Premier Devine of Saskatchewan decided to host his counterparts for the Western Premiers meeting in Swift Current at the comprehensive high school, I got to be sort of a traffic, a host, I guess, but also someone directing traffic when the premiers or their delegations needed to find something around the high school. The senior PIN did that. The president, the SRC was there. And I got a chance to meet my political hero at the time. And I was nerdy enough to have followed so much of the Constitution discussion, all those First Ministers meetings, and also the National Energy Program dispute and fight led by Premier Lougheed, and just thought the world of him. He was a political hero. And so I got to meet him and shake his hand. And we talked about the fact that it was also, and still I'm a big CFL fan. And I told him that it shouldn't be held against him that he played for the Eskimos for Alberta teams. It was just a great thrill to meet him. And then when I became leader of the Saskatchewan Party after 2004, just reached out to him, and he accepted my request that I could come and visit him and pick his brain and ask him some. I had a lot of dumb questions. I wanted to learn from someone I thought who would have the right answers, and he was just outstanding. We met twice like that. I also was able to meet with Premier Klein twice. He took time to meet, which was a big deal, I think. I got an understanding of how busy a premier's schedule can be, and he always made time to have a chat, to meet and answer my questions. We talked a lot about what you and I have talked about, Trevor, on the role of government. And so those two would be at the top of the list. I can also say that shortly after we were elected, I phoned Premier Lougheed and I said, would you come and meet with our Enterprise Saskatchewan board that we're setting up, sort of an economic development group of people who would advise the government on economic development and on growth, our growth plan. And the Premier said he would. And I said, we're prepared to pay any fee that you might have coming over here. And he said, well, my fee is pretty steep. He said, I'll need airfare and a steak sandwich. And so we flew him over here, and then we had a steak sandwich together in the cafeteria at the Legislative Assembly building in Regina. And then he met with our group for an entire day. He also came into question period. We invited him into the Legislative Assembly chamber where he was feted and paid tribute to by members on our side and New Democrats who remembered him fighting alongside Alan Blakeney on the national energy policy. And it was a great day. But Alberta has two titans, two provincial leadership titans in recent history. And there's a couple of, I guess, my political heroes or those that have inspired me.
Maybe just to wrap up, what to you makes a strong Canadian and or Saskatchewan economy?
Well, I think the government's got to be proud of the sectors that drive growth in your jurisdiction. And we don't have that federally. The government is embarrassed or disdainful of oil and gas. They've said as much. They don't seem to be super keen about modern agriculture. And we are a world leader, global leader in both of those sectors. I think you also want government to stay out of the way of entrepreneurs and small businesses. And that means stay out of their way in terms of unnecessary regulation and taxation. And you want a government that promotes your economy and the things that make it tick around the world. I think that's the role for government in terms of an economic plan. From time to time, there'll be sectors the government wants to emphasize. Maybe it's the tech sector. Fair enough. So you need to avail yourself of tax tools, credits, perhaps. We use the patent box. I think we're the only province that has it on the innovation side, and have had a few companies take us up on it since. And I shouldn't say us, I'm out of it, but take up the initiative. And you can have some tools that allow for finesse, but by and large, it should be a broad-based understanding from government that there are certain things we do really, really well, and we want to promote it. We want to do it more sustainably, but we want to promote it and be proud of it. And then we want to get out of the way of the people who are paying the bills of this country, because the economy, of course, pays for everything, pays for every government program at every level of government. Without taxes to support it, the private sector and private citizens, the country can do nothing. The province can do nothing. And we need to remember that. And I'm not sure we currently have a government that does.
Well, thank you. I think that's a great place to end it. I really appreciate your time. We can end the formal conversation there.
Okay. Well, thanks very much and have a good day.
Hello, listeners out there. Thanks for checking out the podcast. Hopefully the episode provided some insights. If you enjoyed the show, check out trose.ca where more episodes are yet to come. You can also subscribe to the podcast where your token of support is much appreciated. Until next time, happy coffee drinking.